Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. And let's be honest, we've all been a bit of a dumpster fire. Tonight's guest says most of us are having sex with only 10% of our actual potential, and he's here to tell us where we're screwing up in more than just the bedroom. Welcome to the Bachelor Pad, Rob Kancler. Rob, thank you for swinging through tonight. How we feeling? How we doing?
Awesome. Thank you, Joshua. I'm feeling good, man. Looking forward to seeing what happens. These podcast interviews are like experiments and enjoy it. Enjoy it.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you're at and where'd you start?
Okay, with which part?
Okay, so currently where are you located on the globe? And then
Okay.
I always love the backstory. I was like, what inspired you to get into your field? Did you just wake up one day like, great Scott, I have an epiphany and just really get into the work? Or was it one of those things where you kind of just fall into it?
Yeah, great questions. I would say that there are certain things that I've just been following, like certain threads that I've just been following from being in a role, even as a little kid, of just kind of like talking through people's problems with them, basically. Like I just found myself in that sort of like wanting to just like talk about real shit with people and like really get in there, and have very meaningful and open and engaging conversations with people. And I also love to, just like fuck around and have a good time too. But, I know since I was really young, I've gotten a lot of different kinds of training and support and mentorship to basically have more skills to deal with what it is to facilitate basically and like be with people and what they're experiencing. And then there's some sort of kind of convergence between my work as a facilitator and coach. The topic of sex and sexuality has very much been an interest of mine, as it is for most people. And I was actually just writing about this for some marketing material. That one way I could frame the story is that like my excitement as a young kid of like, oh my God, my sexuality is this like intriguing thing to it, I think this is a very typical situation is for most people, it just becomes very isolating and confusing. And we have no idea how to actually like make what we want happen socially on one level, but also just like in the actual intimacy itself. I think a lot of people from speaking to so many different folks from different backgrounds seem to resonate with that frame that like there's a part of me that I want to explore and express and have like a really vibrant part of my life, like sexually speaking, but I have no idea how. I have no idea how to make that happen. And then I think that results in a lot of challenges, like just feeling incompetent, and I guess one thing that I notice I'm drawn to is just being very direct about the topic of sex and just talking about it very, very frankly and openly about like what is the story that we're living inside of and how is that different than what we want and what we would be most fulfilled by as people and as men. So there's an interesting inquiry about like how this part of our lives that pretty much everyone likes sex and wants to have a great sex life, right? And pretty much no one has that. I spent a pretty significant amount of time and energy exploring how to change that from like looking into relational practices or whatever that we could say, like even in the realm of pickup of like people studying seduction, basically, to different things like circling and authentic relating and other kinds of relational practices that support better communication skills and just give people, I think, or at least gave me a lot more time interacting with people in a deep way and developed a trained myself actively to have a lot of different kinds of experiences.
Like, there's a lot there that I want to just stop and unpack really quickly. First and foremost, it makes sense that you enjoy talking about sexuality and sex, or it seemed like from early on, you've always been a meat and potatoes guy. You love conversations of substance where you don't need the frills of all these fancy garnishes if we're like talking about food, like plating. You just really want to get to the substance of the meal. I love that because I'm a similar type of guy. I don't like to beat around the bush. Let's just get straight to the point. Let's have the hard hitting conversation where we're going to have some growth. We're going to feel a little awkward and vulnerable with each other. because that's really where change and acceptance happens, in my opinion.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
And, and then also following that up is the fact that I forget who I was talking to maybe in the last couple of weeks, but they said something that I've never heard before. And I think you touched on that. And that's sexuality is inclusive, education is exclusive. And I was like, we all have our own sexuality and we fit into one or multiple different categories or nuances of it. However, we're not all taught or given permission to explore that. So we don't know what to call it, what it is, where to go to find your people, or just to learn about what's out there. So that makes it seem like it's so isolating and restrictive, like you were talking.
Yeah. Yes, I think that so many people have this, like they start to discover their own sexuality as kids, and then it's like, oh my God, like this is not like I can't be open with people about this.
Hmm.
And I think that it goes from this like intriguing, like, whoa, to being like, oh fuck, like what do I do?
Yeah.
It's and like I think that that's almost everyone's experience, that it's like we have to manage this thing that's very confusing and seems really high risk, and our identity and all kinds of stuff kind of hinge on our competency, and frankly we could say like success in this part of our lives can change people's self-esteem and like their concept of themselves. And it's a very deep part of our development, and it's very difficult. I think that there are so many things related to our development as people that are not super supported by our culture. Like rites of passage is one very clear example. I have an interesting thing about that, how rites of passage really fits into the cultural context that we live inside of, or the absence of it, frankly.
We were talking about this with a guest a few months back that it seems like, at least here specifically in the US, we don't really have many rites of passage. Like, sure, at 16, you're able to like drive and vote at 18, but there aren't really many
Yeah, yeah,
traditions that
yeah.
are steeped into
Totally.
our culture
Yeah.
uh, or identity here.
You
Whereas,
wanna trip out on a story for a second? This is super interesting. When I first heard this, I was like, "Oh my god, wow, what a incredibly important way of thinking about the situation we're in." A piece of context about it, that it's like the once you hear it, you'll never unhear it type of thing for a lot of people. Definitely for a lot of people. The idea is that when we are born, we're all born into the realm of our mother. Everybody, right? And for men, when they grow up, there's a point where you need to transition to the realm of man out of the realm of woman. And that means giving up prioritization of comfort, traditionally speaking. That would mean taking responsibility for safety, basically, of the people that you love. The provide and protect thing is very, very deep in us. Right? And there's this story that basically, because of ultimately the Industrial Revolution, the way that we kind of lost touch with the rituals of our roots, we could call it, in like a mythopoetic frame or like a story frame, we could say that it's like we're transitioning to being initiated into the wisdom body of man, which is, since forever, men have been working with each other generation by generation to learn about how to be men. And we have this break where that doesn't happen anymore in our culture because the father was no longer a part of the
I'll use that working. Yeah.
situation. And then how that can even create a distorted perception in the child's mind of what the father is and who is this guy, but then they still have the experience of their father's temperament, but they don't understand like who he really is, and how that often creates a really negative perception of men. And then the father is absent from the development of the boy comparatively to the traditional way of rites of passage of the elder men kind of bringing the boys up with them, that there's a broken piece, and we learn how to be men by women who didn't have too great of a relationship with men usually, and how much that's just like a deep part of the fabric of our culture, basically, is that there's the absence of this rite of passage, the absence of this transition from the realm of woman to the realm of man, and the unbroken wisdom of the adult man body that has been passed down culturally since forever.
That's a really great point. And It is true. Rites of passage are huge if you look at every civilization that has existed before quote unquote
Absolutely.
present day.
They have had rituals for that transition from being in the realm of mother, being in the realm of woman, to being in the realm of man. There was a rite of passage that often was like very intense, like all kinds of austerities and super intense physical things. Yeah, like wild shit. Wild shit.
One of the biggest things that I love to talk to people about is awareness. We don't really possess awareness anymore, whether it's of ourself or others around us or threats. When we were closer to nature and the origin of things, for lack of better words, shit got scary. Okay. You had to worry about predators, you had to worry about food scarcity, even finding a mate. Now, in a world that's overpopulated and all we do is seemingly grind, you don't really have to worry about protecting much. So threats, those little voices or instincts that were coded in DNA aren't as prevalent anymore. And I think it does affect how we A interact with people and B walk throughout life.
I think that we're touching layers that go really deep into, part of my investigation that we could say is right in line with my interest in the topic of sex, but also as a separate thing, I could say is really like finding a passion in different parts of my life and understanding the body and like what is this thing in a very experiential way also. The body is super interesting, right? To see like, fear is a fucking wild thing. If you think about how consciousness works inside of these particular nervous systems and how that relates to fear, your brain literally functions differently depending on fear in a very real way. And how that relates to the breath is a fascinating thing. Is that there are three physiologically distinct kinds of fear. One of them is fear-based breathing, so that you can basically like mobilize if you need to protect yourself or something that you care about. There's aerobic breathing, which is like if you're playing soccer or whatever, like that whole thing. And the other one is like rest, social engagement, rest and digest, chill kind of breathing. Right. And a lot of people, the way that they have been breathing is often fear-based breathing. So even if you tell them to take a deep breath, it's not necessarily like dropping them into their body. It's crazy to try to relay to people how significant our experience of consciousness can be affected by something that's like almost mechanical, that's like really biological. If people do not know how to breathe properly and their diaphragm isn't released and their cranial nerve, their vagus nerve especially is functioning properly, like when there's a cranial nerve dysfunction or the vagus nerve particularly is not functioning properly, it impacts the way that the body can go into social engagement and safety and co-regulation. So a lot of people that experience like anxiety and even things as extreme as autism, it can be affected by working with the cranial nerve and getting them to breathe properly and do very gentle like physical movements. I think a lot of people assume that there's mental health issues or psychological issues. And from what I've seen from looking at this thing a lot, and of course, I'm not a doctor, everybody do their own research, but like there's a very like a thing that people can take responsibility for of how they can get their body working that will completely change the way that they experience life. That there's a way to learn to work with the body and work with consciousness to expand into a quality of like almost like being high and expanded and just feeling way more pleasure and function in your body. Right. And this is just an ongoing investigation for me of like how the body like expands and unwinds into having capacity and range for so much stuff that is totally outside of what most people experience, not because of like a innate difference in them fundamentally in most cases. It's like there are ways of working with the body and working with consciousness that kind of open into just like profound success and abundance and capacity for experiences and intimacy and just having a good time. It's interesting because this turns into a conversation about responsibility in a way. But this is off because it's like we're talking about like we're not just subject to circumstance and in the way that we typically think we are. Like there's of course things that we have no control of at all, but there's a hell of a lot that we can really take responsibility for if we understand how consciousness works. And a big part of how consciousness works is biology, like literally. So it's like how do we like do shit different with how we direct our attention and generate thinking and just feel our body and experience how we organize our body.
No,
So
that's so true. That's why so many practices like breath work and yoga, deep meditation, I think are as prevalent as they are, is because some people are really trying to do the work to reconnect their bodies back to that natural state that we and our ancestors were in.
yeah,
Because you're right, a lot of people who practice or focus on study breath work learn that you said, like I said, there are the three types of breathing, but so often that breathing that we are just used to, that we live day to day, is so shallow that it really doesn't pass throughout the
yeah,
body. So you're not circulating
yeah,
as much as you should. And everybody like thinks the body is a circle. So if you are getting good, solid breaths, relaxing breaths, like when the doctor asks you to breathe in, take a good deep breath, it's a circulatory breath, meaning that that breath moves all the way around throughout your body. And when you do that, you do get a little euphoric state in your mind because your brain's actually getting some good blood flow. And it's almost like your neurons are firing at an exponentially higher rate because you can just feel. Okay. We're so disconnected today from each other's energy. So when you really start to feel and you can feel people,
yes.
I do believe that is a thing. We may not necessarily have the science to it yet, but that's like step two. The first step is actually experiencing phenomena.
I mean, I think that the science is really catching up to it, especially some of there's so many people that are such brilliant minds that are trained scientists, for sure. And then there's definitely a lot of like rigidity and dogma, but what you're saying is 100% real. So, one of the things that's really interesting about what I do is I teach people how to develop these skills because it's so often talked about like you have it or you don't, and it's like no, there are processes. There are things that you can learn and things that you can do with the right sort of instruction that will help you develop those kinds of abilities or capacities, the like felt sense, body intelligence, intuition about what to do in a sexual setting, or even how to be more socially calibrated, like having more swag and more ability for people to find interest and attraction. All of this is like things that you can learn, and it's not like learning it to manipulate people. It's like learning it to have more creativity and more authenticity and more freedom, starting on a body level and also like
Yeah.
on a belief system and identity level. It's very important to address the way that that stuff is too. And it's amazing, it's amazing to have witnessed so many people go through this process of like having more capacity to experience something that they've been wanting since they were like 9, like the experience of being like actually sexually met and like having an experience of true satisfaction and rich,
By
open
fulfillment.
sexual relationship with a woman is something that, so many people, regardless of your sexual orientation or anything, I would say almost everyone, there's like a longing to be deeply met intimately and sexually and like deeply gratified and satisfied and met in a very loving and safe way that's also like really hot and awesome. Like that's
That is
pretty
a
universal.
super big, yeah. That's a super big crisis that kind of nobody's talking about right now. People just really aren't having, not that they're not having sex, they're not having meaningful or orgasmic sex in a sense. Because sure, there's a physiological response of pleasure. It's an important part. Do not get me wrong there, but it's only such a minute part of that interaction. The actual connection between person to person is what,
Yes.
in my opinion, takes something from just being sex or carnal to orgasm and lovemaking. Because the deeper your connection, I find, with your partner, or the more that you can stimulate your body, their body, your mind, their mind, because the brain is like the largest sex organ we have in the body. So if you can get that revved up, and sky's the limit on how long and how intense things can become.
Yeah. I mean, Joshua, you're speaking my language here, man. It's yeah, just one of the most beautiful parts of life that a lot of people don't really see anywhere near as much as they will with a little bit of exposure and experiences of having a more subtly, like subtlety is an interesting word, right? But like there being like more of the nuance and subtlety of self being involved in the intimacy. And something that I think is super interesting is that we could say that you cannot meet somebody more deeply than you've met yourself. So that's also really real.
So I am a big believer that nothing happens in isolation. And we talked about how sex and identity go hand in hand along with rite of passage. But you say that sex actually changes how people show up in their career, their friendships, even the vibe when they walk into the room. So,
For sure.
how exactly does that work? I know we were talking about being more present in the body, but
Yeah.
do you have any
Well,
examples or
imagine that like a guy had been experiencing like a real sense of the elders and mentors and also people that he was sexually interested in being, they're just not being like weirdness and taboo and people being able to just kind of go from this initial feeling of innocence and intrigue to just like having a very healthy, self-honoring, very like open and grounded relationship with their sexuality. There's so much corruption or like sickness, like things that are really weird in the way that people kind of have their yeah, like neuroses or whatever, and like how challenging it is and maybe that sounds more pathological than I mean. It's like the sense of like when people have a desire or an impulse, the way that they act on that with creativity and authenticity when it comes to sex and sexual intention and sexual interest and what's actually inside of us in terms of what we are actually longing to experience and be met in it's so disparate. It's so intensely not actually like what we are seeking to be met in and have fulfilled, like what real fulfillment and satiation is for this really fundamental part of our identity and our relationality and our creativity and our pleasure and like yes about being is like inside of this thing that's so weird from religious indoctrination and porn, like yeah, just a deep confusion in the fabric of
yeah.
our society and how that like the sex piece is such a fundamental and central part of who we are. And we develop in a context that is so corrupted in giving like a viable developmental context for a healthy sexuality that is truly fulfilling. Right. And we can look at religion and we can look at like real statistics, like real data about this from the kind of clinical pelvic healthcare angle, and the dysfunction in people's genitals and pelvises is huge, like, and how so many women don't experience orgasm and experience pain and numbness during sex, and how I read a study recently that was like 40% of men under the age of 25 have reported erectile dysfunction. And it's like,
I,
whoa, what is going on, people?
no, it used to be a huge flip of that was a problem for people and their fees, and it exponentially increased as they got older, but it is a huge
Yeah.
thing there. I want to take a step back to what you were saying and kind of stay in this space for a little bit. As we were talking about how porn, religion, and media have kind of made our internal wires go haywire as far as sexuality and desire, almost in a sense.
Yeah. Or like our nature. Like what we thrive in, the emergent intelligence of human beings seeking to experience like great sex and love and intimacy and simultaneous orgasm and deep devotional juicy sexual orgasmic experiences. Like it seems like kind of everyone wants that.
I believe that it's a really fat concept that a lot of people, I think, only get the broad strokes of. So follow me down here and like
Yeah, sure, I'll follow you. Let's play
correct me
around,
if I'm
dude.
wrong at any point. But I love ancient Greece for the fact that I think they were the pinnacle of a lot of things.
Yes.
They embodied and embraced sexuality across almost every metric that you can think of because they were open. It wasn't stigmatized. Love was love. They had so many different types of love that they were aware of, and they treated them differently but equally. And during that period of enlightenment, almost in an aspect or self exploration and acceptance, they made so many discoveries. And I think that's why, comparatively speaking, the world hasn't seen that much discovery since.
It's super interesting, right? We can also look at like deep Hindu and Egyptian culture and how there's incredibly rich traditions of sexual practice in some wild shit. Also in China, there's deep lineages of sexual practice through human history of people that have been exploring something that gives a human being profound experiences and abilities and how that impacts consciousness. And it gets like real woo sounding, I think, but maybe not. Let's say something like like the exploration of what is possible and worthwhile for human beings approached in like a very deep way is a vehicle for decoding consciousness or like decoding human potential and realizing human potential in a very deep way related to there's a phenomena related to what happens between consciousness and energy if you understand how to work with sex. And it's profound because if you were to ask people like, do you want to explore body intelligence and enlightenment and get into the philosophical frame of polarity and masculine and feminine? Most people are like, no, dude, like I got shit to do. I don't care about that. Like, what are you even talking about? But if you wanted to say, like, do you want to have the most amazing sex humanly possible and give your partner the most amazing orgasms humanly possible until you're really old? Everyone is like, yeah, I do want that, probably. The way that you get that, the way that we are able to experience these things that are such a deep longing for people, this kind of deep sexual satisfaction, like deep sexual gratification and the intimacy in that is, yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. And it may just sound so weird to people, but for a lot of people, I think they'll be like, okay, I get what you mean. And for other people that they may be like, I'm living that all the time. That there's a way that the body engages in, we could say, alchemical processes that impact consciousness in a very vivid way. It's like you're working with something that has tremendous creative use, the capacity of it, like opening consciousness, awakening consciousness when properly used.
And I think that's so difficult for people to comprehend present day is
Yes.
because, like I was mentioning earlier, is education. When you are like a coach or a sex therapist or any other holistic practitioner who spends most of their time studying an area, yeah, I understand the theory and we can get really technical and we have a lot of jargon that makes it easier for us to paint a more vivid picture. But when you are speaking to Jack and Joe on the street or
Yeah.
Samantha and
They,
Anne
yes.
who don't do this for a living and they just know, I like what I like, things feel good. It's
Mhm.
harder to articulate these points and
Hell
get
yeah.
them to have the enriching conversation, especially when perspective has been limited. Circling back to religion and porn, if you look at porn, I would say about only 3% of porn that is produced is really ethical or about fostering connection to reach true orgasm or enlightenment in a sense. The rest of it is just about carnal desire or taboo adultery. There are too many similar narratives that are stacked on top of each other, which I think has closed the scope, really made our perspective just pinhole like three major points that like people think are attractive. And that's like taboo affairs, step family like thing that's a big hot market, and maybe just
Yeah.
like
Totally.
rough jackhammer like
Yeah.
sex,
Yeah.
which is too limiting because it's a whole big world out there. So I think once we can get people to realize that the curtain has been pulled back, you can look at the man behind the curtain. The only way to have pleasure, this is the only way to have sex. This is what love looks like. One of my favorite things to do, I think, like once I got to like college, was to actually just like put subtitles on my porn and look at the actual scripts that is given. Because nowhere in there do they talk about love. Nowhere in there is it really about pleasure or empowerment or self discovery. It's just like, I feel a thing. How do I get a release?
Hmm.
Once you, Kim Anami, who is one of my favorite sex educators and practitioners of sexual health, says that there's a difference between cookie cutter and TV dinner sex and connection and gourmet sex. I think we live in such a world where no religion pretty much, or there are a lot of like Christians and Catholics in the world. The Catholic Church is not teaching pleasure. They're not teaching deep connection. They're teaching abstinence and shame. And
Hmm.
that is two really big anchors. Yeah. And then you have, like I said, porn limiting your anchors on quick release. So people just really aren't given a chance to
Yeah.
experience higher levels or multiple
Yes.
levels of
Yes.
connection and satisfaction.
Yes, and I'll take it even further. I'm totally with you, dude. Perfect way to lay it out here. Even how much people ejaculate and how they're addicted to, there's still so much sensation seeking and addiction to peak orgasm in people's masturbation and even in their sex, but especially in their masturbation, that there is this driving towards coming, that it's almost like sex is to rub your dick so that you can make yourself ejaculate. Like that's what that is, right? And this depletes people so much, and it also puts them in a different kind of state of exploration or action when they're having sex. It's so severe. When people start to explore, there's a couple things that I found to be tremendously helpful in the work that I do. This idea of agendalessness, or forget what sex is let's say an invitation that I share in sex education contexts, or in how we help people kind of really get to know something besides what they do so far, or at least deepen what they see and what they have access to, is to invite people to, like, imagine that you're an alien who just got like avatared into a human on Earth, and you were just experiencing a naked body of another person who's like loving and warm towards you, and to just give yourself space to like leave yourself alone and just let yourself have an experience, not through the lens of your conditioning and your narrative and meaning making, but just from like let something happen, right? Like just that is such a profound experience to have for a lot of people. And I've heard again and again people come back just being like, holy shit. Most of my audience is heterosexual men. I find it easier to teach in like a very direct language around that, is like holding the leg of a woman where there's like warmth and openness, and you're both feeling safe and open towards each other and connected to each other, and you just like feel her body and the impact that that has on you, and the impulses and sensations, and like what is it actually like to experience being in your body with a sense of openness and curiosity, to connect to a naked woman, is often like an incredibly like ecstatically immersive and fun and creative and playful and amazing experience, right? It's such a fucking trip to have that kind of an experience. It's so like rapturous and nourishing and fun and wild. When so many people are, they're not dropped into their body, and they are not breathing properly, and they don't feel safe, and they don't understand co-regulation, there's such a displacement of true authenticity and creativity.
So often people think that sex is about technique, but it's not. In all reality, it's about presence.
Yes.
And one thing that we all wish we could go back and do, because the more sex you have, the more you kind of lose this magic. But if you remember the first time that you were ever with a partner, or the first time, I don't even want to say the first time you explored yourself, because most times we don't explore yourself. Coming from a male perspective, it's like sorry to be crude, but you're just taught to choke the chicken, let's be honest. But really, that's why I love Masturbation May. Anybody who's been listening, you know about that. If not, go back and check out our Masturbation May kind of
What is
30-day
it?
program.
What is it?
So every May, I release a program called Masturbation May. And the point is to get people to start exploring themselves, to maybe take a break from porn. And each day we get a new challenge, whether that's turning off all the lights and not worrying about the visual, just getting a sense of your body, just touching different areas, switching hands. Maybe it's looking yourself in the mirror as you try to pleasure yourself. Maybe that's trying nipple play, breath play, temperature, all these other different things to
Mm.
connect with your body. So I think it's so important because we are taught to do a lot of things in society. Sex is not one of them. So it's crazy how we could go 15, 18, 20, 40, 50 years into life. Some people may not have ever switched hands when trying to pleasure themselves or a partner. Some people don't really know what they want. And like you mentioned earlier, the deepest person, I forget how you phrased it, but it was like, if you do not know yourself, how can you know anybody else?
Yeah, you can only like you cannot meet anyone more deeply than you've met yourself, I think is probably what I said. And it's so real. Like the thing, Joshua, that I again maybe want to like highlight that hopefully one or two more people will hear it as they're listening to this is that like there is a way to explore sex and intimacy that can be like so unbelievably nourishing to your life on like physical, mental, spiritual, emotional levels that are hard to even understand. Like it's hard to even imagine how real and how deep that is and how much it can open yourself into like just such a deeper understanding of how consciousness works in your body and what is really true for you. Because it's like to fully be expressed sexually, we have to go into all these ranges that we've been conditioned out of. This learning of how to really trust the body again and allow like what is your relationship to life force that moves through you, and for that to not be like an abstract thing, right? It's very concrete. And another example is like, as you're saying, so many people go through decades of life without having certain experiences. And even the thing of just like, what is it like to just like slow down in sex and just like really explore slowness and togetherness and play. There's something that I think when a lot of men hear these more like feminine words like softness and tenderness and love and intimacy, that it touches something in the cultural mythology about like what it means to be a man, and how like if you acknowledge the value of these certain parts of ourselves, that it means that you're like weak or you're a dishonorable man or something like that. If you really own the intimacy that we can experience with each other for anyone besides like your wife, kind of, and your children before the age of 3 or whatever, like that sort of part of our nature, right? One of the biggest issues that I've seen with, let's say, marketing the work that I do is there's an issue where people have to admit that they don't have it yet to be willing to buy my thing, to be willing to sign up for the program. They have to admit that they're not sexually fulfilled.
Yeah.
And that feels like psychologically unsafe for a lot of people to be like, I so admit that I'm not sexually satisfied that I'm like typing in my credit card information. Is like something that like, even though basically everybody is not sexually satisfied, there's this weird like ego thing where people like they can't deal with the cognitive dissonance or be willing to be that humble and tell the truth to themselves, right? And it's amazing. Even when a man is like, I'm curious about this subject, I'm like, hell yeah, respect, man. That's great.
I love what you were saying, and you're right. A lot of people don't want to feel like they're incompetent in any way,
Yes.
especially men when pleasure or providing is what we are supposed to.
I think there's something very unique about mental health and like relationship wellness and like therapy stuff and yeah, things related to sex and relationships for men, that there's this kind of like story in our culture that men are supposed to just somehow know You're
Right.
supposed to just somehow know how to have good relationships with people and how to deal with your own emotions and how to have healthy relationships with the people that you're sexually involved with. Like it's like you're supposed to just know how to do that. And if you don't, that's fucking weird, bro. And it's like that's the world that so many people live in. Is like they're like, no, shit would have to be really bad and really weird for somebody to be like, hey, I need somebody to teach me how to fuck. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
it's very like that for me,
It
for
is
many
it's
people.
hard depending how it's, served to people, but it is hard for most people to, like I said, think that they're incompetent or inexperienced because of communication, first off. I think that there wasn't a problem and all of a sudden people started reading or there started to be studies about the orgasm gap and women just were like, "Yeah, we were just actually just like trying to give you a pat on the back."
Great point.
And so, we're not taught how to emotional intelligence from any age. So, not being able to regulate your emotion or your performance after hearing something like that causes people to spiral, maybe have performance anxiety and or overcompensate in some way.
Hmm.
And we're not taught about pleasure or connection when it comes to sex as well. So, realistically, what tool are we given
Hmm.
to fulfill any partner? The
Well,
answer
we're
is
given
none in
we're
my
we're
book.
given porn and we're given like YouTube tutorials now, and we're given the stuff that we've seen in movies and television. But
So
that's
that's a great question, actually. We are shown things, but are we quantifying that as educational material?
I would say
I
that
was like,
it is imprinting us with our cultural model
mhm.
for what to do. There's two different layers of stuff about sex. One of them is instinctual. And the other is culture, right? Like, and this is true with so many other things. Like, we could even say, like, music and like dancing or whatever is instinctual. And then there's culture of music and dance. And it's like very diverse, right? Like, there's so many different lineages, there's so much culture around these inherent parts of us. Like, or again, like movement and music is hugely obvious and as two examples of something that's both inherent to human nature and body doing what body does basically to us developing these different lineages of different kinds of behavior and cultures and meaning making and stories and movement vocabulary and sounds and structure to music, right? And we could say that the same kind of thing is true with sex, and the sexual culture that we live inside of is fucked up and fucking weird. And I like to be direct about that because it's like it's very bizarre, right? And it doesn't like the body is not working, right? Like back to this thing about clinical, like clinicians who spend a lot of time with people's pelvises and vaginas and bellies and penises and like people who really are like with bodies. They pretty much all tell the same story of like people's like our bodies are not in good shape.
Mhm.
Like there's like
Oh, that's so
dry
true.
and dead nerves and fascial adhesions and prolapsed uteruses and urethras and prostate cancer and hemorrhoids and erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation and body shame issue. It's like very apparent that there's something weird going on, right? Like there's something unwell occurring. There's something corrupted and unwell occurring in that part of our embodiment and our expression and our identity. There's something very weird going on, right?
No, that's so true. Like you were saying, and it shows in multiple different fields. We talked a surprising amount about it this season that even as far as reproduction goes, the male population is starting to dwindle because of microplastics and male fertility issues that are prevalent in societies. I was like, if something's left unchecked, or if we're not really cognizant of our bodies, really listening to what's going on there, we're gonna spell our own extinction in
I
a
mean,
sense.
it goes so deep into the emasculation of men, the fundamental feminization and emasculation of male humans.
Yeah.
This is a
Now,
very deep and pervasive thing that I think doesn't get a whole lot of press comparatively. Like it's astounding, you know, and people could be like, oh, that just sounds so like manosphere, yada, yada. And it's like, whoa, you know, I think it's very important for people to really understand what this concept of emasculation means and how it occurs in our own relationship with our creativity and our authenticity. And it's just everywhere. It's one of those things that I think once people see it, this disillusionment is like, whoa, that emasculation piece unravels.
No, it's huge. I mean, you could even take that as a step back is just all of men's health in general is usually something that's not really prevalent, well talked about or educated,
Yeah.
mainly because we have this weird shame stigma that if we're not perfect Adonises all the time, then there's something wrong with us. When in all reality, things fall apart. No matter how much you love your car or no, like how luxury model it is or functional off-roading it is, it needs maintenance. But somehow, as a society, as a culture, we don't give ourselves the same grace. I was like, we expect our cars to break down more than we expect our body. When one has been scientifically engineered to last a while, the other is just nature. Like I said, that's a whole different rabbit hole that we can spend another episode or five talking about. Before we wrap this up and get out of here, can you tell us where we can sign up or where everybody can sign up for this membership program or that 8 week
Sure.
course?
Yeah, totally. So robkancler.com is an easy place. But yeah, my name, robkancler.com for people who are just listening. Yeah, my last name is Kancler. And you can find me on social and all that.
Guys, thank you so much for making it through another episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. Go thank Rob by giving him a follow, checking out one of his or both the full 8 week course, and let him know that you came from the Bachelor Pad, that you really what he was talking about today. And even if you have more questions, Rob, don't hesitate to DM me or him, and then maybe we can see about getting him back on a little later in the season or next season sometime. I know we have so much more that we can explore, not just about men's health, men's sexuality, but just great sex for everyone. But until then, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode with all of your friends. And I will see all you amazing bachelors, bachelorettes, and partner people next week for an all new episode.
Thank you, Joshua.